I think we'll go ahead and get started and start talking about PharmCAS and how do you put your passion for pharmacy down on paper in your application. We'll talk through some common pitfalls of mistakes that people make in the application process, and then we'll also talk about the positive ways that you can portray who you are through the application. So, and for those of you who saw my previous presentation about interviewing skills, we might actually talk through some of those key questions that we talked about that would be good for your interview. So, why did you choose pharmacy? Anybody have thoughts on why you might be interested in pharmacy? Go ahead.
Maybe because I like making medicine.
So you like making medicine. Okay, that's a very good reason to be interested in pharmacy. Anybody else want to share why they're interested in pharmacy? Go ahead.
For me, it's more like a personal, first and foremost, it's like personal from my mom. Like she takes a lot of medicine, and like in the long run, I think it's more like a personal thing that comes with the community.
So for you, it's more personal that you have a family member who takes a lot of medications, and so that was something that inspired you and wanting to learn more about that and made you interested in pharmacy. Excellent. Anybody else want to share? It's okay if you don't. I'll share with you why I was interested in pharmacy. When I decided that I wanted to go to pharmacy school, I was interested in healthcare, and I knew that I was interested in healthcare, and so I started investigating a number of different health professions and learning about each one. And that's something for those of you who haven't yet decided exactly where you want to go and what you want to do, that's a good idea to start investigating what some of the other health professions are out there and what your options might be. But I kind of narrowed it down based on things that I learned. Like, I really get grossed out by putting my hands in someone's mouth. So dentistry was out. I'm convinced that nurses are the nicest people in healthcare, and they take crap from everyone, doctors, patients, pharmacists, and I thought, gosh, I am not nice enough to be a nurse. So I don't think nursing is for me. You can see here that I wasn't necessarily doing a lot of really good research about why something may or may not fit. But I was sort of narrowing things down. And then I figured out pharmacy because a friend of mine, her dad was a pharmacist, and he was leaving the pharmacy profession. He was going into real estate. And he decided that he didn't want to be a pharmacist anymore because he was really tired of dealing with people. And so as he went through and told me all the reasons why he didn't want to be a pharmacist, I was sitting there thinking, well, I really like being around people. I like talking to people. I like dealing with the public. I don't always like it when the public isn't the smartest that they could be, but I like working with people and working with the public. So I was like, okay, well, I'm good with that. And he hated insurance and dealing with insurance, and that people didn't understand their insurance. And is that something that's a challenging thing about pharmacy? Absolutely. But is it something that can be overcome? Absolutely. So as I was listening to him going through all these reasons why he didn't want to be a pharmacist, I realized, I can handle all those things that he's saying, and I actually kind of feel very differently about some of those things than he does. And so I thought, all right, maybe I need to investigate if pharmacy is actually a good spot for me. And so I was lucky enough to know someone in the right place, and I got a job working as a pharmacy technician in an inpatient pharmacy in a hospital. And so I got a very different perspective than most people think about pharmacy and what pharmacists are and what pharmacists do, because I was working in a hospital setting. 60% of pharmacists work in the community pharmacy setting, and that's your CVS, your Safeway grocery store chain, your independent pharmacy in the community setting, 60%. So that's what most people think of as what pharmacists do, is the community pharmacy setting. And so I was getting a completely different experience in a hospital setting, and the more I was there, the more I enjoyed it, the more I learned, the more I liked it, and the more I realized that this really was a good fit for me. So for me, why pharmacy is, well, why healthcare? Because I wanted to help people. I knew I had skills that would fit in terms of certain perspectives, and so I really focused on developing those skills. And then I got some experience and figured out that, yeah, it's a good spot for me, and I could really be a pharmacist. And one of the things that I did as I worked as a pharmacy technician was that I was really clear with them that I wanted to go to pharmacy school. And it's amazing how when you tell someone that you want to be like they are, how much they love that. And they're excited to teach you about it. So I noticed that when I would tell the pharmacists I was working with that I wanted to be a pharmacist, they were more excited to explain things to me, and I learned a lot more than I would have had I just functioned as just a pharmacy technician. A lot of the pharmacists kind of took me under their wing and said, now let me explain to you why we do this way, versus you need to do this. So it was definitely a good experience. So one of the things that you want to think about with your PharmCAS application is why you might choose pharmacy and why it might be a good fit for you. And you're going to need to articulate this in your application multiple times. And there's a handful of reasons there on the screen. I don't know that any of those are exactly the things that I said about why I chose pharmacy, but they're all very good reasons. It's a very well-rounded career. A community pharmacist especially is a jack of all trades. You never know what's going to walk in the door that day, and you have to be prepared to be able to talk to any patient about any particular disease state. So it's very well-rounded in terms of the skills that you have to have. You're a vital part of the healthcare team. You're the medication expert on the healthcare team, so you're playing a very important role in improving the health of our country. There's outstanding career opportunities, and it's okay to say that in your application, that there are outstanding opportunities with what's happening with the Affordable Care Act, with the job market. There are definitely opportunities out there, and I'm looking for a career that's going to give me those opportunities. Excellent earning potential is a good reason for a lot of people to go into pharmacy, because you definitely make a decent salary. By no means are you going to get rich, but you're going to make a decent salary. And how do you communicate that in your application if that's something that's important to you? Saying things like, I want to have a career that allows me to help people and provide for my family. That's a good way to say that. As opposed to, I'm really just in it for the money, right? You don't want to convey yourself in that way in your application. And of course, pharmacists rank in the top 2 or 3 pretty much every time in the Gallup polls as one of the most trusted professions out there. We tend to flip-flop with nurses as number 1 or number 2. So one of the other things that I think is important in terms of your application and in talking about why you want to be a pharmacist is educating yourself about what pharmacists do. And one of the things that you'll notice in this slide is you see the word educate up there a lot, right? I think of myself as a pharmacist as an educator. I'm educating patients about how to properly use their medications. I'm educating other healthcare providers about what the best treatment options might be and helping make those decisions. So education and communication is a really key part of being a pharmacist. So when you put your passion down on paper in your application for pharmacy school, conveying that you have good communication skills and that you're excited to educate patients about their medications is a really good thing, because it shows that you understand what pharmacists do. And if you talk a lot about dispensing medications in your application, that's going to not be as good of an idea, because most pharmacists don't do much in the dispensing process. You're the final check at the end of a dispensing process. You might design a dispensing process for a pharmacy technician, but realistically, what would you need a doctorate degree for to stand there and count by 5s and to pour something from a big bottle into a little bottle? So when you talk about what a pharmacist does, you want to have a really good idea about what pharmacists do today and what the vision is for what pharmacists will do in the future, because you want to be able to tie your application back to that message. If there was one thing that I would want you to remember about what a pharmacist does, it's on this slide. Pharmacists are the medication experts on the healthcare team. And that's manifested in the role of the pharmacist in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different tasks and jobs and duties that you do as a pharmacist that always but they almost all link back to this, that you are the medication expert. There's no other healthcare professional that learns more about how medications work, about how your body impacts medications, about what it takes to get a tablet to stay together as a tablet and not just dissolve right there in your hand. We learn about that sort of stuff in pharmacy school, how a drug is designed, what delivery system we want to use for a particular medication, and what's going to work best. So no matter what, the pharmacist is that medication expert on the healthcare team, providing knowledge in a lot of different ways. Pharmacy career options, I hear a lot of times people say, well, I don't really want to work in a community pharmacy. I don't want to work at CVS or Walgreens, so I don't want to be a pharmacist. I'm a pharmacist. I work for a nonprofit association that represents pharmacy schools, and I am still a pharmacist. So there are a lot of different opportunities out there for you with a Pharm.D degree than you might imagine. If you have a particular specialty that interests you, I have a good friend who is a pediatric infectious disease pharmacist who works with children with HIV managing their medication therapies. So if you have a very specific interest, like pediatric infectious disease, there are opportunities in pharmacy for you. Any area of healthcare that you can imagine, there is a pharmacist that's involved. They might be behind the scenes, but they're there, and they're having an impact on that particular part of healthcare. So when you think about what you might want to do and how you might want to portray some of that information in your application, maybe part of it is learning about all the possible career paths available to you while you're in pharmacy school so that you make the right decision about the best career path for you within pharmacy. So as you work through the application process, there's 113 pharmacy schools right now out of the 130 that use PharmCAS for their application. Those that don't, there's just a handful. They tend to be more rural schools like Idaho State, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, schools where those students are only applying to that one program. And if they don't get in, they're not leaving. And I understand that. I'm originally from Idaho, and I had a lot of classmates that had the thought of, if I don't get into pharmacy school at Idaho State, I'm just not going to be a pharmacist, because why would you ever leave Idaho? I have lots of reasons why I left. I do still love Idaho, but there are definitely some schools that have a little bit of a different mindset about the application service and not wanting to get too many applicants from outside their state. But in the state of California, all of the pharmacy schools here do use PharmCAS for their application. So one of the things that I will tell you in terms of filling out your application is plan to have some time set aside to sit down and do it. Think about the fact that you're going to have to enter every single course that you've ever taken in college, anywhere, ever, and that's going to take you a few hours. So plan to have some time to do it. Plan to apply early. Don't wait until the last minute. Make sure that you send in your transcripts as early as possible, maybe even before you've completely submitted your application. Because sometimes it takes a couple weeks for your registrar to get your transcripts, get them in the mail with all the right paperwork, and send them into PharmCAS. So think about those things a little bit ahead of time. You can also follow PharmCAS on Facebook and Twitter, where they answer a lot of questions. So if you have some specific questions, I also tell people all the time, email info@pharmcas.org. They're much faster at email than they are at telephone calls. If they have to spend too much time answering the phone, they're not spending as much time verifying your coursework in your application and sending it off to the schools. So email is usually the best. If you tweet about PharmCAS and that you're struggling with this part of the application, there is a person out there who searches the word PharmCAS every day, Monday through Friday, to see what questions there are out there, and that will answer your questions on Twitter as well. So definitely some different modes of way to get answers to your questions. Wanted to give you guys a little bit of detail about the applicant pool and what things look like nationally from a national picture. I wanted to give you sort of some perspective on some of the data. You can see here that we've pretty much increased in applicants every year for the last few years. We have kind of noticed as well that there's been a little bit of a plateau in terms of the actual number of people. But this is just out of PharmCAS, how many people are applying to pharmacy school. So we do miss a few from the schools that don't use PharmCAS. So my best guess based on that, because we can't really track those that don't apply through PharmCAS, is that there's somewhere around 20,000 applicants for pharmacy school. And there's just under 14,000 seats. So when you think about people versus the number of seats that you're behind might sit in one day, we're looking at about 1.5 to 2 applicants per seat. I think it's important as well to see what the averages are for the entering class. And this is the 2012 data because we're still collecting the fall 2013 data. So I apologize for not having the most up to date, but we're getting all that information in right now from the pharmacy schools for the people who just started this fall. So you can see there that in terms of GPAs, we're looking at about a 3.4 for the average GPA. In general, you're going to need about a 2.75 GPA at least to be considered. So when you're thinking about where you want to apply and what you want to do, you want to think about that grade point average that you're bringing to the table and need to see what you can do to bring that up if it's maybe a little bit low. But knowing that the average is 3.4, there are definitely people in the, excuse me, the 3.0 and a little bit below that do get into pharmacy school. One of the things to know about the PCAT, excuse me, a common mistake that happens around the PCAT is people will read that slide and they'll go, what, 55.2 in terms of the percentile? And they think percentiles are the same as a percentage, like I got a 55% on the exam. That's a little bit different. A percentile is actually a ranking. So the way that we score PharmCAS is you get from 1 to 99. You can't get a 0 and you can't get 100. And the difference between an 80th percentile on PharmCAS and the 75th percentile on PharmCAS might only, on PCAT, is only maybe 1 or 2 questions difference because it's a ranking. So it's taking that raw score that you get on the exam and comparing you to everyone else who takes the PCAT. So one of the questions that I often get is, well, is it comparing me to the people that took it just during that administration, or is it comparing me across the board? It's comparing you across the board. And that percentile rank is an admissions tool that our admissions officers use to be able to see where you might match up against your peers. So just something to think about, that usually the average acceptance for students is around the 55th percentile. Generally more female than male. You see here that we say 7.9 applications per seat. That's not actual people because people can apply to more than one program. So because we have those handful of schools that don't use PharmCAS, we try to put out a number that includes everyone, and that's based on total applications. We also know that students are applying to about 4.5 to 5 schools apiece. So as you look at where do you want to apply, you want to look at that. For those of you who are California residents and want to apply only at California schools, that's definitely something to think about, that there are way more California residents than there are seats in California. So more than likely, you're probably going to need to apply outside the state of California. And what does that mean for you? That you're probably going to have to take the PCAT because there's more than 75% of all the pharmacy schools that require the PCAT, and those are those that are outside of California. If you end up being a reapplicant, you apply the first time and you don't get in and you want to apply again, PharmCAS does have an option for you to roll over your application from the year before, and it carries over some of the information in your application. It doesn't carry over everything though. There are some things so that if any of you guys do find yourself in terms of the reapplicant perspective wanting to apply again, there are a couple of things that we do ask for you to submit again, and there's a reason for that. We want a new personal essay. We want new letters of reference. We're going to make you pay again because we have to go through the same work that we did the year before to get your application to the schools. But the reason that we ask for that essay and the new references is we want to know how you've changed in the last year. So what makes you different now from when you didn't get in the first time? And we generally have around 15 or 16% of our applicant pool that are reapplicants. we have 5 deadlines each year that our schools choose from, and the schools choose those deadlines. We do enforce those deadlines with technology that after 12 o'clock Eastern time, did you hear that? Eastern time, not Pacific time, that's when the application closes on those deadlines. So if you wait until the last minute, there's going to be a lot of other people who waited until the last minute, and the system's going to get busy. And if you need to have that deadline extended because you didn't make it, you have to contact the school to have them extend it for you individually, which is a challenge. So get it in and get it done early. In general, those 5 deadlines fall right around the first of the month in November, December, January, February, and March each year. So unless those dates fall on a Saturday, and then we choose the next Monday. One other piece to notice on this particular slide is the 4 to 5 weeks of processing time. So if the deadline for a school that I'm applying to is November 1st, and I get my application in just before Halloween, everything's set, it's going to take a little bit of time for my application to get processed. Because we have actual people who sit and they look at your transcripts and they look at all the courses that you've entered into your application, and they verify line by line by line that everything is exactly correct. Because what we're doing is we're taking that data that you've entered into your application and calculating your GPA, and we want to make sure that's right. We're calculating all of those different sub-GPAs, math, science, undergrad, grad, all those different GPAs, and we're sending that information to the schools. So we want to make sure that we spend the right amount of time to make sure everything is exactly correct the way that you've entered it. And so that does take some time to be able to do that before we can send it to the school. Sometimes we get your application by the deadline, and you can imagine the boxes and boxes and boxes of mail that we get right around a deadline, right? So it's actually really fascinating to see, you know, those big US mail bins, that there's 30 of them lined full of transcripts that come in right around a deadline. So it does take some time for us to get all that scanned into the system and make sure that everything's set. So it does take a little bit of time in terms of processing. The next little piece I want to talk to you guys about is around pharmacy education and what are the educational requirements and what can you expect when you get into pharmacy school. I really like this graphic. I think it's a really sort of pictorial representation of what happens when you're in pharmacy school. In general, out of the 130 pharmacy schools in the country, the majority of them will allow you to apply after only 2 years of undergraduate education. They don't require you to have a bachelor's degree. Now, you guys are here in the state of California, and I will give you the message that the majority of the schools in California either require a bachelor's degree or you're not going to get in without one. So in most cases, if you want to apply in California, you're going to need to finish a bachelor's degree. I personally finished my bachelor's degree before I went to pharmacy school, and for me, it was the best thing that I ever did because I needed that educational foundation when I started pharmacy school. I needed to have that extra experience before I got there to mature as a person, but also for my educational foundation that I got from my bachelor's degree. So that's something that's important for you guys to think about. But in this graphic, you'll see that it's a minimum of 2 years of undergraduate experience before you get accepted into pharmacy school. And then when you're in pharmacy school, you're gonna learn a lot of different things. You're gonna learn the hard sciences or the basic sciences. Things like medicinal chemistry and physiology and pathophysiology, all of those things about how the human body works, how the human body doesn't work, how do drugs impact that, what's the pharmacology that goes into all of that. You'll learn a lot of those hard basic sciences, as well as the social and behavioral sciences. So when you think about social sciences and the behavioral sciences, you think about, I could have the exact same conversation with 2 patients, and one of them will leave the pharmacy and go home and take their medication, and the other one won't. So how can I change that encounter the next time for that one who didn't, to modify it to what they need, because their behavior is different than this patient's behavior. And there's a lot of science behind that, so you'll learn that. You'll learn communication skills. And while you're learning all of these didactic things and the basic sciences and the social and behavioral sciences, you're getting opportunities to have what we call practice experiences and applying it in a real world setting. You'll start out with introductory pharmacy practice experiences where you're mostly just shadowing and getting exposed to some different pharmacy settings. And you'll apply that through simulations with things like SimMan, where you're going to be treating a simulated patient, an electronic patient, and you'll do that all the way through to your last year of pharmacy school, or in some schools, the last 2 years of pharmacy school, which are called advanced pharmacy practice experiences. And on those APPEs, that's where you're going to get the opportunity that you're working under the supervision of a pharmacist, but you're doing everything that you've learned up until that point. So you're the one that's providing the pharmacy services for those patients under the supervision of a licensed pharmacist. So it gives you that hands-on experience. Oopsie, I have 2 reapplicant slides, apologize for that. Next little piece, we're going to talk about letters of reference. Another key piece of how you communicate who you are is through your letters of reference. So do you want to ask someone who you sat in a classroom that there were 450 people in that classroom and you never once actually spoke to the professor? Are you going to ask them to write you a letter of reference? Probably not, because they're not really going to know you. It doesn't matter that you got an A in organic chemistry and they were the person who taught you organic chemistry if they don't know you. So you want to choose people to write your letters of reference who know you and who know who you are and know what you want to do and know that you have a passion for pharmacy so that they can provide a perspective about you. Different schools have different requirements in terms of their letters of reference. We have some faith-based pharmacy schools that will tell you that they want a letter from the clergyman that you the clergy is based on it could be a priest, it could be a father, it could be a pastor, a minister, you get the idea. They want a letter from that person that talks about your spiritual well-being for their program. Whereas a state-based institution that's a public institution like UC Davis, you're not going to want to have anything from clergy because there's the separation of church and state in terms of the public institutions. So you'll want to pay attention based on the programs that you're applying to. You can submit up to 4 letters of reference through PharmCAS. You can also send letters directly to the schools if you need to. So if you're applying to a number of programs that have very different requirements, you can contact the school and ask to send the information directly to them if you run out with 4. However, we have found that for the most part, people are able to accommodate those different requirements in terms of who those letters should come from through the option of having 4 letters of reference. So the process is that, and a really important piece of the process is that you need to talk to that person before you put their information in your application. Because when you put their information in and you put their email address in there and you click save, it sends them a message from the system that says, Jen Adams has chosen you to write a letter of reference for her PharmCAS application. And they get an email right then. And if you haven't talked to them first, that's awkward, right? You want to make sure that you've had a conversation with them before you enter their information into the application. You can also prompt them through the application. Once their information's been in there for a couple of weeks, you can go in and there's a little button that says send reminder email in case they've forgotten. And that'll come directly from PharmCAS and you can trigger that to happen just in case they haven't gotten things in on time. Many schools are pretty understanding around deadlines with letters of reference because they know that you don't completely have control over how busy someone's schedule may or may not be. So work with the schools in terms of if that person's not going to meet the deadline. So if you have a school that does committee letters, those only count as 1 letter of reference in your application. So if you get contacted from a school that says, your application's not complete, we require 3 references, you only have 1, you may need to remind them to go in and look at that letter because it's containing all of the different letters in the committee letter, but it's only showing up in PharmCAS as 1 letter of reference. So that's a key piece to pay attention to. Sometimes that mistake happens on the school. You can also see in the applicant portal when your letters are received. So when that person has filled everything out and sent it in, you can see in the status bar of your application that it's complete and that it's there. At that point, you can't remove their letter of reference. It has to be there. once they've submitted. So if you decide you don't want them to submit a letter of reference and they haven't already submitted it, you can delete them and put somebody else in, but not after they've submitted it. So a couple of things that we tell, this slide is actually from a presentation that I've given to pre-health advisors about what they would include in their letter of reference about an applicant. So the reason I keep this slide in here for you guys is because if I'm telling them this is what they need to include, you could maybe help them with this information. If I'm going to ask someone to write a letter of reference for me, I'm going to send them my resume and tell them a little bit about myself. I might send them a copy of my personal statement about why I want to go to pharmacy school. So things that you need to really plan well ahead of time so that you have that done, so they have an idea about why you want them to write a letter for you and who you are and what you're trying to convey in your application. So giving them a little bit more information. We're going to ask them to tell us about your strengths and weaknesses. So maybe you could make a list of your strengths and weaknesses and give to them when you ask them to write that letter for you to help them with that process. Because I know for me, I work with a lot of different students. I get to know some on a better level than others. And so sometimes it's nice to have that refresher and that reminder about some of the students that I may not have known as well who ask me to write a letter of reference. So a couple things to think about. This is the not so fun part of the presentation where I talk about when people do things wrong in the application. I'm going to give you guys some ideas about the common pitfalls and mistakes that people make. Some of those mistakes have very, very serious consequences. What you see there on this slide, highlighted in orange, is that there are mistakes that can be made during the application process that will prevent you from becoming a pharmacist, ever. If you violate the code of conduct and receive what we call the career ender sanction, we will scan every application pool from that point on and not allow you to fill out an application. So very, very serious consequences. In some cases, the consequences aren't quite as serious because the infraction might not have been as serious, but in those cases, you're going to have to sit out for a year and apply again the next year. And then you have to indicate on the application that you previously violated the code of conduct. With this, we're a little bit more strict than some of the other health professions. But the reason for that is that pharmacy is the most regulated profession that there is. We're regulated by a state board of medicine, a state board of pharmacy, the FDA, the DEA, you name it. Anybody who has any contact with medications wants to regulate what a pharmacist does. And so if we find through the application process that you might not be 100% honest in the way that you portray yourself, what's going to happen when you're filling out DEA forms when you're a pharmacist? Are you going to flub those up and not care? Are you going to break laws when you're a pharmacist? So we really view this applicant code of conduct as being very important to our profession in trying to weed out anybody who might not have the best character. If we can find that out before they even start pharmacy school, then maybe we'll have less people like those folks in Massachusetts who weren't following all of the right guidelines and people died from spinal meningitis. So those are the kinds of things that we try to prevent, and that's why we take this so seriously. Number one offense in terms of the applicant code of conduct is plagiarism. Now, in terms of that, we're talking 17,500 applicants. We're talking about 400 people who plagiarized their essay. So is it a lot of people? No. But do you think those 400 people thought they were plagiarizing? How many times have you been given an assignment in an English class about writing a particular type of paper that you Google that type of paper to look at an example of what that might be? Anybody ever done that? I have. I'm going to tell you right now, don't do it. When it comes to your personal statement, do not Google the word personal statement. Don't do it. Don't look at any of the examples out there. I'm going to tell you right now how you're supposed to do it. Because when you look at those samples, you think, well, that's a really good way of saying that. Maybe I should just put that one sentence in my application. The number one most plagiarized sentence comes from studential.com or personalstatement.com. It's on both of those websites. and it is, my first inclination to become a pharmacist rose out of my concern for others. How often do we all use the word inclination in our grammar? And what's the likelihood that there would be that many people that would put that exact same sentence into their personal statement in PharmCAS? Right, it's less than 3%. So knowing that, just don't look. I'll help you, I'll give you the format, I'll tell you exactly how to write it. Just don't look on the websites out there. Before we get to the don'ts, I'm going to talk about the do's. And the do's are the really good things that I think are really important. So when you're writing your essay, you want to write an outline. And go back to that English 101 and think about what is a proper essay. Proper essay structure comes with an introduction, a 3-paragraph body, and a conclusion. This might be even taking us back to junior high or high school when we first learned about essays, right? Tell me what you're going to tell me, and then tell me what you told me in that outline. And what you want to focus on in terms of your essay, you want to focus on why you want to be a pharmacist, why you're a good fit for pharmacy. You want to be able to show in your essay that you know what a pharmacist does and you see how you fit into that. So think about that message that you want to convey, because your personal statement is the place to do it. And just follow that format. It's not rocket science. It's pretty easy in terms of the essay structure. But don't get too flowery. Don't talk in a way that you wouldn't talk normally in your personal statement. And when you edit your personal statement, have someone read it. You might get too close to it and not recognize that you maybe had a typo in there. And you definitely don't want to have a typo in your personal statement. But when that person edits it, make sure that you don't let them make some significant changes. And if that person edits your essay and they come back and they've changed a paragraph and said, but doesn't this sound better? Ask them where they got that. We have had cases where students have had plagiarism in their essay because that person who was helping edit their essay changed it and put in a sentence that they found from a website and plagiarized for them. And then they have 2 problems. 1, they have plagiarism in their essay. 2, they're telling me it's not my fault because someone read it and they changed it, I didn't. And then I'm saying, well, why did that person write that part of your essay and you didn't? So, things to think about. In terms of the idea about toot your own horn, this can be a little controversial. But you want to talk about what your strengths are. You want to say why you are a good fit. But you don't want to toot your own horn so much that you say things like, I deserve to be a pharmacist. Because I deserve to be a pharmacist says something very different than I'm very passionate about pharmacy and would really like the opportunity to go to pharmacy school. You don't want to appear as if you think that this is something that should just happen for you because of all these qualities and skills that you might have. You want to convey it that you would love that opportunity, and these are the reasons why. So, a little bit semantics, but very important. These are tough to read, I know, but I wanted to give you guys some examples, some real life examples. These are actual essays that were received in PharmCAS of things that portrayed a person in a way that they probably didn't want to be portrayed. And the first thing that you notice from all these words on the slide is this a proper structure? No. It's all one giant paragraph. But I'm going to read it to you really quickly. In June of 2010, I was charged with a DUI. Upon my contact with the officer in my kitchen, I had a blood alcohol content of 0.078. I made the mistake of driving roughly 150 yards in search of my puppy. Although I had no intent of leaving my neighborhood or traveling any more than to find my dog that ran out of the house, I should not have driven. I was convicted of the misdemeanor DUI in February of 2011. It's not been expunged yet, but it will be expunged in February 2016 in return for not contesting the charges. In all actuality, I believe I could have made a strong case to get the charges thrown out, but along with being a costly process, I do not believe that people should abuse the legal system, and I realize that I was wrong to be behind the wheel regardless of my intentions. Although it has tarnished my personal record, it has made me a stronger and a safer person. Now, this wasn't in a personal statement. This was in a section where they were commenting on their criminal background and giving a chance to explain what had happened in their criminal background. But what do you think this conveys about this person? they're making excuses. They're not taking responsibility for their actions, right? So when whatever it is that you write, you want to be taking responsibility for your actions. If there's something that you need to explain in your application, take responsibility. Don't make excuses, don't blame it on anybody else, take responsibility. If there's a grade that's maybe not the best grade, and you want to explain that in your application, and explain why, don't make excuses, take responsibility. So I think that's a really important message. I don't know that this particular student really thought too much about how this was going to be conveyed across, but what I see is this is somebody who's making excuses, not taking accountability for their actions, and maybe not someone who should be a pharmacist. Because I want people to be in my profession that I'm proud to be a part of, who are going to take responsibility for their actions and be accountable. Okay, next one real quick here. This is the first paragraph of their personal statement in PharmCAS. I'm going to be honest up front, there was a time that many of my peers laughed at my goal of becoming a pharmacist. They thought I wouldn't be able to last the challenges that come with being a pre-pharmacy student, and they didn't hesitate to share their negativity. For me, high school wasn't anything more than a few hours to be social, the occasional paper, and a lot of football. Real life and decisions didn't come until college, and I could wait. So I settled into my easygoing, satisfied lifestyle while still maintaining my 3.8 GPA all through high school. During my first semester of college, my mom suggested I look into pharmacy, and it seemed like something I would enjoy. I mean, I did receive one of only 2 awards for excellence in chemistry given at my high school, despite my lack of effort. With that under my wings, along with the job security inspiration given by my parents, I began my pre-pharm career. What do you think it says about this student? And this is just in the first paragraph. There was more. A little bit of a bragger, right? Show off. They admit that they don't try and that they're smart even though they don't try. What that says to me is they're probably going to flunk out of pharmacy school because they don't know how to study. Yep, it's like he's going to pharmacy school because his mom told him to. Is that a good reason to go to pharmacy school? Probably not. How about the job security in quotes? Is that a good idea? Is that a good way to say, I'm interested in pharmacy and I want to help patients and also still be able to make a good living that I can support my family on? Or job security? Very different ways of portraying that. Okay, and this is, I think, the last example, but I think it's important to see these examples of mistakes that people make. Many people go through their first couple years of college with a major in the undecided category because it's tough to come straight out of your parents' house and away from that pantry full of appetizing free food and realize that you need to start finding a means to pay for your own groceries or just ramen noodles. So I immediately started working in a pharmacy to find my career and a new grocery aisle away from the bargain noodles. Okay, this is real. It's creative. I mean, I'm going to think of her as the ramen noodles girl, but at the same time, the whole focus here is about making money and not really anything about why she really wants to be a pharmacist. So hopefully this information has been helpful for you. I wanted to also let you know in terms of the PharmCAS application, if you have questions, if you have concerns, the PharmCAS customer support is there for you. There is a team of people at PharmCAS that are there to answer your questions. They're there Monday through Friday from 9 to 5 Eastern time, which I know is a challenge for you guys because the time zone differences. But that's why we also have info@pharmcas.org and why we have Facebook and Twitter. So I would encourage you guys to send your messages in and your questions in to the customer service team via email. They're much faster that way at being able to respond as opposed to calling. And then you can email right that minute that you have the question, because I don't know about you guys, but when I was in school, I never did anything on a normal time frame. I did a lot of stuff at midnight, 1 in the morning. So if that's the case for you and you're filling that information out and you have questions, just go ahead and send those questions via email because they're definitely there. There's also a lot of frequently asked questions on the website. which are really helpful. And another key thing to note, and we haven't noted it on the website yet, but the whole pharmcast.org website is being redesigned. And in about a month, it's hopefully going to be a lot more user-friendly than what you see today. So watch for those changes coming in the next month or so. Also, if you have questions about pharmacy careers and about what pharmacists do, our website at AACP has a lot of information there for you, aacp.org/pharmacy careers. There's a lot of information that will help educate you about what pharmacists are and what they do. So. All right, unless we have some additional questions, I think we have time for about 1 or 2 questions, if anybody has any. One question here. Do we have a tool in PharmCAS to calculate GPAs? We actually don't have a tool specifically. The application does make some changes for you, like if you choose quarter hours versus semester hours, it will modify some of those things. But we do have instructions in the application that tell you how you can calculate a GPA. And we've gone back and forth over whether we should have a tool in the application that calculates it for you and just gives it to you. But some of our admissions officers are a little bit against that, because if you can't calculate your GPA, how are you going to calculate a medication dose? So I gave them the suggestion that we should just have a tool to put it in there, and they said no. So, and that was the reasoning behind it. But yeah, so there are detailed instructions. So no matter whether you've had quarter hours or semester hours and different quality points and number of hours and all that sort of stuff, and it gives you specific instructions no matter what type of institution you've gone to be able to calculate those GPAs. You're welcome. Well, in general, you get so the question was around volunteer hours and extracurricular experiences. So there's 2 sections within the PharmCAS application. There's extracurricular experience, and then there's work experience. So any healthcare related experiences that you've had, you put those under work experiences that if you're getting paid for them. So that's what the key differentiator is. If it's been volunteer experience, it goes under extracurricular. So anything that you got paid for goes under work experience. Anything that you didn't goes under extracurricular experience. Generally include everything related to healthcare that you've done, but if you've had work experience in doing other things, you put that in there as well. Under your extracurricular activities, you're limited, I believe, to 20 different activities. So come up with what are the most important activities that you want to convey about who you are and in your application to put those in there. And you get to put them in order of priority. So if there's something that you really want them to see first, you put that in there first. So if you have more questions, I'll stick around afterwards to answer those questions. But thanks for coming.